The snow stretched endlessly in every direction, a white wasteland under a gray sky. The wind howled across the frozen plains, carrying flakes that stung the eyes and chilled the bones. Footprints left by the survivors of the crash were quickly covered, leaving the snowfield smooth and empty once again. Silence reigned, heavy and deep, broken only by the occasional groan of the ice beneath the weight of the cold. Among the scattered wreckage of their ship, a small group of aliens huddled together, shivering and silent. Their bodies were thin, weakened by hunger and cold. Eyes that had once been bright with curiosity now reflected only fear and sorrow. Some clutched the remains of their fallen friends, unable to move on. Their faces were pale under the snow's reflection, and their voices were almost gone, swallowed by grief and despair. A young alien, smaller than the rest, moved slowly through the snow. Her scales were frosted with ice, and her wings were folded tightly against her back. She had survived the crash, but the sight of her friends lying lifeless among the wreckage had left her trembling and withdrawn. She wandered the snowfield in silence, the cold biting at her skin, her eyes fixed on the white horizon as if searching for something she could not name. The others watched her from a distance, too tired to speak, too scared to move. They had no leader now, no guiding hand to help them through the endless days and nights. The storm that had followed the crash had buried most of their supplies, leaving them with little food, little warmth, and almost no hope. The snowfield seemed endless, a frozen prison that mirrored the emptiness they felt inside. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance. At first it was just a small dot moving steadily across the white landscape. The survivors squinted through the wind, unsure what they were seeing. It was a human, a being they had only heard of in stories, a creature fragile and strange, walking alone through the snow without hesitation. The young alien froze, uncertainty and curiosity mixing in her chest. The human's presence was unexpected, almost impossible, and yet here he was, moving calmly toward them. The human's clothes were thick and suited for the cold, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow. He did not carry a weapon and his hands were empty. His face was calm, even kind, and his eyes scanned the group of survivors with care. He did not rush, but he did not stop either. He simply walked, moving steadily closer to the huddled aliens. The young alien took a hesitant step forward. She had been taught to fear humans, to avoid them at all costs. Stories told of their power, their unpredictability, and their strangeness. Yet something about this one felt different. There was no threat in his movements, no harshness in his expression. Slowly she stepped again, then another, her small claws leaving tiny marks in the snow as she approached. The human stopped a short distance away, lowering himself slightly to appear less threatening. "Hello," he said softly, his voice carrying over the wind without sounding loud or commanding. "I'm here to help. Are you okay?" His words were simple but filled with warmth, a sound almost foreign to the frozen silence around them. The young alien tilted her head, unsure how to respond. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her small wings twitching nervously. The human did not move closer, but his presence felt steady, safe. Slowly she took a cautious step forward, then another, until she was only a few feet away. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deceit or danger. There was none. Only patience, only understanding. Other survivors watched from a distance, curiosity and caution battling their grief. Some whispered softly among themselves, unsure if they should approach or flee. They had been so isolated, so frozen in despair, that the arrival of a human, one who showed no fear, was almost unbelievable. Yet they could not deny that the figure before them seemed kind. The human extended a hand, palm open, showing that he meant no harm. "You're not alone," he said gently. "I know it's hard here, but I can help." The young alien blinked, a small sound escaping her throat. She had been alone for days, wandering through the snowfield with nothing but sorrow. The offer of help was strange and new, but it called to a part of her heart that still hoped, even faintly. After a long moment, she stepped forward again, finally letting herself reach for his hand. He did not pull away but held it steadily, letting her lean against him. The wind whipped around them, cold and harsh, yet a small warmth began to grow between them. She could feel it in his calm presence, in the soft tone of his voice, in the simple act of extending his hand when no one else would. The human knelt slightly, adjusting his position so she could rest safely against him. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're safe now. I'll help you and the others. You don't have to be afraid anymore." The young alien pressed her small body closer, trembling less with each word. For the first time since the crash, she felt a measure of relief, a hint of hope. In the silent snowfield, under the gray sky, a small change had begun. Grief still hung heavy in the air, but it was no longer alone. A human had appeared, offering warmth, safety, and care. The young alien, once frozen with sorrow, now felt the first stirrings of trust. And though the snowfield was still vast and cold, the presence of kindness, steady, simple, and patient, began to make the impossible seem possible. The survivors watched quietly, sensing a small shift in their frozen world. Perhaps hope could return. Perhaps grief could be shared and eased. And in the middle of the endless snow, a human had taken the first step toward changing everything. The young alien stayed close to the human, her small body pressing against his side as he moved through the snowfield. The wind still cut sharply, and the endless white stretched in every direction, but for the first time since the crash she did not feel completely alone. Around them the other survivors watched from a distance, unsure whether to trust this human who had appeared so calmly, yet something in his presence made the frozen grief feel lighter. The human knelt in the snow, pulling from his pack a small bundle of supplies. He carefully laid out warm blankets, small containers of food and water he had melted from ice. "You must be hungry," he said softly, voice gentle against the wind. "And cold. We can fix that first." The young alien tilted her head, staring at the simple gifts. She had not eaten well for days and warmth had been scarce. Hesitation lingered in her eyes, but the smell of the food and the sight of the blankets stirred something deep inside her, a flicker of trust. Slowly she stepped forward, letting the human drape a small blanket around her fragile body. The warmth felt strange yet comforting, and her wings relaxed slightly. He handed her a small piece of food, and she took it with trembling claws, nibbling carefully. The human watched patiently, speaking softly. "You don't have to eat fast. Take your time. It's okay." She blinked up at him, noticing the lack of urgency, the lack of force. He did not demand obedience or strength, only patience and understanding. The other survivors began to move closer, curiosity overcoming fear. They still huddled, but now they watched the human more carefully. His gestures were simple, but they were full of meaning, offering warmth, sharing food, kneeling to be at their level. One of the larger aliens stepped forward, hesitating, before the human handed him a blanket and a container of food. "We'll survive this together," the human said, his voice steady. "We all can help each other." The small alien looked around, seeing the cautious trust growing among her companions. They had been frozen by grief, paralyzed in fear, but the human's calm, gentle actions began to break through their sorrow. She realized that these small gestures, giving food, offering warmth, speaking softly, were not just acts of survival. They were acts of care, proof that someone still valued life even in the harshest circumstances. Over the next hours, the human helped each survivor in turn. He showed them how to bundle themselves against the wind, how to sip water slowly so it did not freeze in their throats, and how to eat carefully to conserve energy. He moved among them with patience, never raising his voice, never showing frustration. His calm presence allowed the survivors to feel safe, and safety gave them the courage to begin moving again, even if just a few steps at a time. The young alien stayed close, watching and learning. She began to mimic his actions, draping blankets over smaller survivors, offering food to those who were hesitant. Her small voice chirped softly, words of encouragement she had never spoken before. The human noticed and smiled gently. "That's it," he said. "Helping each other makes us stronger. You're doing very well." The praise was not loud or demanding, but it made her chest swell with pride. As the sun shifted, its pale light glinting on the snow, the human led the group to a small ridge where the wind was less harsh. He helped them build simple shelters from wreckage, arranging blankets and supplies to create spaces of warmth and safety. Each action was deliberate, simple, yet effective. The young alien watched the process, fascinated by how easily the human could organize and care for them all without shouting or commanding. She realized that leadership did not require power or fear, only patience and compassion. By evening the snowfield looked different. Small pockets of warmth glowed in the fading light, shelters built and bodies huddled safely inside. The survivors were still weak and frightened, but their eyes held a spark they had not felt since the crash. The young alien perched on a small mound, looking down at the simple shelters. She chirped softly, a sound that expressed both relief and wonder. She understood that the human had changed something already. The ice of grief had begun to crack. The human knelt beside her, brushing a small amount of frost from her scales. "You see," he said softly, "even here, even now there is hope. Small steps make a difference. One kind act leads to another. And together we can survive and help each other." She leaned against him, feeling warmth in more than just her body. The human's care was more than practical, it was emotional. He had shown her that someone cared, that life mattered, and that grief could be softened by compassion. Night fell and the survivors rested in their small shelters. The wind howled outside, but inside there was warmth, food, and safety. The young alien curled near the human, feeling protected in a way she had never known. She thought of the days before when grief had consumed the snowfield, and realized how different it felt now. One being's simple kindness had changed the atmosphere entirely. In the quiet, under the pale light of the snow and stars, she finally spoke a small, hesitant word, "Thank you." The human smiled, resting a hand gently on her back. "No need to thank me," he said softly. "We'll face this together. One step at a time." The snowfield, once silent with grief, was no longer frozen in despair. The human had taken the first step of compassion, and the survivors, including the small alien, had begun to believe in warmth, trust, and hope again. Even in the harshest, coldest place, one kind heart had the power to change everything. The morning after the human helped the survivors find warmth and safety, the snowfield still stretched endlessly, but there was movement now where there had been only silence. The small alien watched as the human moved among the group, quietly organizing, teaching, and caring. He did not shout or force anyone to act, yet the survivors followed his guidance. Slowly they learned that even in this frozen, harsh world they could take steps to survive, and perhaps even thrive. The human began with the basics. He showed the aliens how to melt snow safely for drinking water. He demonstrated using small containers and careful heating methods, explaining each step simply. "Drink slowly," he said softly. "If you drink too fast, the cold will shock your body. Take small sips. Stay warm inside." The young alien watched intently, repeating the steps after him, learning through action rather than words. Her confidence grew with each small success, and she began to chirp softly, encouraging other survivors to try the method as well. Next, the human taught them how to find or build shelter against the wind. He pointed to the natural ridges and broken pieces of their crashed ship and explained how to stack debris to block drafts and retain heat. The small alien helped, lifting light pieces with her claws, learning to balance objects carefully. She struggled at first, dropping debris or knocking it over, but the human never scolded her. Instead, he gently demonstrated again, explaining, "Mistakes are how we learn. Try again. You'll get it." Slowly, her confidence grew, and she began to construct her own section of the shelter. The human also encouraged them to move together as a group, teaching cooperation. He paired the aliens in teams, showing them how two could carry heavier items or help each other across icy patches. The young alien paired with another survivor, a slightly older alien who had been silent since the crash. They stumbled at first, unsure of how to coordinate, but with the human's calm instructions, they learned to communicate, lift, and balance together. By the end of the day, they had managed to move supplies and food to a safer, more central location. Beyond survival, the human began teaching lessons in patience and observation. He asked the young alien to watch the sky and the snow, noticing patterns in the wind and changes in temperature. "If you understand your environment," he said, "you can prepare for it. You can avoid danger before it arrives." The alien watched carefully, her small eyes scanning the horizon, learning to predict the shifting wind, the settling snow, and even the way shadows could indicate obstacles hidden beneath the surface. Slowly, she began to see the snowfield not just as a threat, but as a place that could be understood and navigated. The human also showed them how to ration their energy and food. "Use only what you need," he explained, distributing small portions and teaching them to stretch their supplies over longer periods. "Conserve your strength. Every movement counts." The survivors learned to pace themselves, to rest when needed, and to plan their actions carefully. The young alien chirped encouragement to her companions, repeating what the human had taught her. She had become a small teacher herself, showing that learning could spread from one to another. During breaks, the human spoke softly to the young alien, explaining the importance of hope and courage. "Even in the coldest, loneliest places, your heart can guide you," he said. "Trust yourself, trust your friends, and take small steps forward. That is how you survive and grow." The alien listened, wings folded tightly, tail flicking slightly in thought. She realized that courage did not mean rushing blindly into danger. It meant staying calm, making careful choices, and helping others along the way. As the days passed, the survivors began to move more confidently. They gathered snow for water without hesitation, built shelters with greater skill, and communicated more effectively with each other. The young alien no longer trembled with fear. She explored the snowfield with careful steps, guiding smaller survivors, checking the shelters, and even using her wings to carry lightweight supplies across icy patches. Her confidence grew as the human continued to guide her with patience and calm. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky glowed pale pink and gold, the human gathered the survivors around a small fire. They were tired but proud. "You have learned well," he said, smiling softly. "You survived together, helped each other, and began to understand this world. Each of you is stronger because of what you've learned. But the journey is not over. More challenges will come. Always remember what we practiced here: patience, cooperation, observation, and care." The young alien curled up near him, listening closely. She understood now that learning was not only about survival. It was about trust, courage, and the bond they shared. She had learned to help others, to see possibilities where there had once been despair, and to take the first steps toward leadership among her peers. That night, as the snowfield lay quiet under the starlit sky, the survivors slept with a sense of security they had not felt in days. The young alien closed her eyes, thinking about the human's words, about the lessons learned amidst the ice, and about the small changes happening in herself and the group. She realized that survival was no longer about fear alone. It was about understanding, compassion, and courage. By morning, the snowfield, once a place of grief and silence, had begun to feel alive with small movement and quiet hope. The human's lessons had planted the seeds of trust, strength, and cooperation. And the young alien, once lost in sorrow, had begun to see herself not just as a survivor, but as a part of a community capable of growth, care, and resilience, even in the harshest, coldest world. The morning air was sharp and clear, but the horizon darkened quickly. Clouds gathered in heavy gray layers, and the wind began to pick up, whipping snow into the air like tiny blades. The survivors sensed the change immediately, shivering not just from the cold but from unease. The young alien looked up at the sky, her wings folding tightly against her back. She had learned to watch for patterns, but even she could feel the threat in the gathering storm. The human moved among the group, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had anticipated this, but the storm was stronger than expected. "We need to get everyone to shelter immediately," he said calmly. "Stay close to me and follow my instructions. We can face this together." His calmness steadied the small alien, who had begun to feel fear rising in her chest. She pressed close, chirping softly as if asking for guidance. The survivors began moving quickly, gathering supplies and following the human toward the shelters they had built in previous days. The wind grew stronger, carrying snow in blinding sheets. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the frozen ground became slippery and treacherous. Some of the larger aliens stumbled, their claws slipping on the ice. The human stayed beside them, guiding their steps with gentle touches and clear, steady instructions. "Left foot here, right foot there. Breathe, stay calm," he said softly. The young alien struggled at first, trying to keep pace with the larger group while holding her small body against the wind. She faltered on a hidden ice patch, nearly falling, but the human reached out instantly, steadying her with a firm but gentle hand. "You're okay," he whispered. "Keep moving. You're stronger than you think." She felt a small surge of courage, pushing herself forward despite the harsh conditions. As the storm intensified, visibility dropped. Snow whipped around them, creating a near whiteout. The human used a simple method to keep the group together. He had each survivor hold onto a piece of rope he carried, linking them in a line. "Stay connected," he instructed. "Do not let go. Watch the person in front of you and trust me to guide us." The young alien wrapped her claws carefully around the rope, feeling the pull of the human at the front, and followed each step closely. Along the way, small challenges tested them. Loose debris, icy slopes, and deep drifts slowed their progress. A few aliens panicked, chirping or shouting in fear, but the human remained calm, kneeling to reassure them, giving clear instructions for each obstacle. "Take your time. One step at a time. We can do this together," he said. His words, repeated softly, acted like an anchor against the chaos of the storm. The young alien began to notice something remarkable. Despite the harshness of the snow, the human's calm and patient presence inspired courage in everyone. She found herself stepping over obstacles to help smaller or weaker survivors, giving them guidance as she had learned. Her confidence grew with each successful step, and she realized that bravery was not the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Hours passed and the storm reached its peak. Snow fell thick and fast, the wind roaring in their ears. The group huddled closer, trusting the human's guidance completely. He led them through narrow passes, around dangerous crevices, and toward the ridge where they had built more substantial shelters. Every move was deliberate, each step carefully calculated to minimize risk. The young alien followed closely, chirping softly encouragement to those nearby, becoming a small but important part of the effort. Finally, after a long and exhausting trek, they reached the shelter ridge. The human helped each survivor inside, checking their bodies for frostbite or injuries, offering blankets and warm water. The young alien curled up in a safe corner, her small wings folded, tail tucked close. She was exhausted, but a sense of pride filled her chest. She had faced the storm, endured fear, and helped others survive alongside her. Inside the shelter, the storm raged outside, but the survivors were safe. The human moved among them, speaking quietly and reassuringly. "You did well," he said. "We faced it together. You followed instructions, you helped each other, and you stayed calm. That is courage. That is strength." The young alien looked up at him, her small eyes shining. She understood now that strength was more than physical power. It was patience, cooperation, and trust. The other survivors began to share small smiles and quiet chirps, acknowledging their success. The storm outside continued, but the group felt a sense of accomplishment and unity. They had survived together, guided by the human who had shown them how to act wisely, calmly, and with care. Even in the face of nature's harshest fury, they had found safety and hope. As night fell, the young alien nestled close to the human, still trembling from the cold but comforted by his presence. "You were amazing today," he whispered softly. "You helped others. You learned. You were brave." She chirped softly in response, her small voice filled with trust and gratitude. Through the long night, as the snowstorm continued outside, the survivors rested safely. The young alien reflected on the day's lessons. Courage was not the absence of fear, survival was about planning and care, and even the smallest and weakest could contribute to the safety of the group. She had learned that trust and cooperation could overcome even the harshest conditions. By morning the storm had passed. The snowfield was calm once more, its surface sparkling under pale sunlight. The survivors emerged from their shelters, weary but alive. The young alien spread her wings briefly, testing the cold air, and looked around at her companions. They were still weak, still recovering, but they were no longer paralyzed by fear or grief. They had faced the storm together, and in doing so they had grown stronger, braver, and more united than ever. The human watched them with a small smile. He had led them through fear and danger, but the lessons were clear. Courage was shared, survival required teamwork, and even in the coldest, most hopeless places, hope could grow if hearts were guided with patience, care, and understanding. The snowfield, once filled with despair, now held a spark of life, trust, and determination, ready to face whatever came next. The snowfield was quiet now, peaceful after the storm. The air was crisp and the sun reflected off the ice, making the world sparkle. The survivors moved slowly, carefully inspecting the shelters and supplies. Though they were tired, their faces held something new, a small spark of hope. The young alien spread her wings and looked around, realizing that the endless white no longer felt empty or frightening. Something had changed and she could feel it in the air. The human walked among them, carrying supplies and checking each survivor for injuries or frostbite. His calm presence, steady hands, and soft voice continued to inspire trust. "You've all done very well," he said quietly. "We survived the storm together. We faced fear and we are still standing. That is something to be proud of." The survivors chirped softly in response, some nodding, others smiling, the first real expressions of relief since the crash. The young alien walked beside the human, helping smaller survivors carry blankets and food. She had learned so much over the past days, how to survive, how to care for others, and how to remain calm under pressure. Now she began to teach as well, repeating the human's instructions to her companions. "Move slowly on ice," she chirped. "Hold hands if you can, watch for deep snow." Her voice, once timid, was now steady and confident. The group worked together to reorganize their temporary shelters, making them stronger and more comfortable. The human supervised but let the survivors take initiative. He showed them how to use pieces of the crashed ship and ice blocks to create wind barriers and support structures. The young alien helped guide others, lifting small blocks of ice and moving debris carefully. The effort was slow, but everyone participated. For the first time, each survivor felt they had a purpose beyond mere survival. In the afternoon, the human gathered the group near a cleared patch of snow. "Look around," he said softly. "The storm has passed. The world is still harsh, but we are alive. We have each other. And that is important. We can build from here, step by step." The young alien looked at the faces of her companions. Some were smaller, some larger, but all were alive and breathing. The fear that had filled their hearts was fading, replaced by courage and determination. He showed them simple methods to gather food from the frozen environment, using small traps and careful observation of animal tracks. He taught them to conserve energy and share tasks, emphasizing teamwork over competition. No one survives alone, he said. Everyone has a role. Everyone can help. The young alien helped set traps, watched for signs of movement in the snow, and guided smaller survivors to safer spots. She had grown in skill and confidence, her small wings carrying her lightly across the frozen ground. As evening approached, the survivors gathered around a small fire the human had built. The flames crackled, casting warm light on faces that had been pale and fearful for days. The young alien curled up beside the human, feeling the heat, the smell of smoke, and the comfort of safety. For the first time she allowed herself to relax fully. Her small chest rose and fell steadily as she listened to the quiet conversation among the survivors. The human spoke softly to the young alien. "You have grown so much," he said. "Not just in strength but in courage and care. You helped others, you learned to face fear, and you trusted yourself. That is what matters most." She chirped softly in response, understanding more than words could express. She had survived the cold, the storm, and her own fear, and now she could help others do the same. Night fell, and the snowfield was calm, the stars sparkling above like distant fires. The survivors slept in small clusters, feeling protected and reassured. The young alien stayed near the human, trusting him completely. She thought about the days since the crash, the storm, and the lessons learned amidst the ice. Grief had been heavy, almost unbearable, but now hope was reborn in their hearts. In the following days, life in the snowfield began to take shape. The survivors moved with purpose, gathering water, maintaining shelters, and exploring the area safely. The young alien took the lead in small ways, guiding weaker survivors and sharing what she had learned. The human continued to teach, but he also stepped back, allowing the group to rely on each other. They had become a small community, bound together by trust, courage, and compassion. The snowfield, once filled with silence and grief, now held signs of life and cooperation. Small footprints crisscrossed the snow, shelters stood sturdy against the wind, and the survivors shared food and warmth. The young alien chirped in delight as she watched others working together, realizing that even in the harshest, coldest world, hope could flourish. One morning, the young alien and the human stood on a small ridge, looking out over the snowfield. "See what you have done?" he asked gently. "You faced fear, helped others, and built a community. That is something no storm can take away." She nodded, feeling proud and strong. The snowfield was still cold, still vast, but it no longer felt hopeless. It was a place where courage, care, and trust could grow. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden light across the sparkling snow, the survivors moved with purpose, ready to face whatever challenges might come next. The young alien spread her wings, feeling the wind on her scales, and chirped softly, a sound full of confidence and hope. The human smiled beside her, knowing that the small acts of compassion, patience, and guidance had transformed not only the survivors but the snowfield itself. Grief had once filled the snowfield, heavy and endless. Now hope had returned, bright and steady, carried in the hearts of those who had survived. The young alien, the human, and the others had learned that even in the coldest, harshest places, life could thrive when courage, trust, and care were shared. And in that vast, white world, they were ready to build a future together, step by step, with hope reborn.